Welcome back to the Dershow. The Democratic National Convention continues to be an anti-Israel hate show from beginning to end. I think I'm correct. I've been watching it. I think I'm correct by saying not a single speaker has said anything positive about Israel. Emhoff talks about how he doesn't like anti-Semitism, and Schumer how he's wearing this square that shows he doesn't like anti-Semitism. That's not the real problem. Nobody admits they're anti-Semitic. They just use their anti-Zionism as a cover for their anti-Semitism. If any Democrat dared to say anything positive about Israel, they'd be booed off the stage. So that's why they don't. That's why not a single Democrat, as far as I know, has told the assembled crowds the truth, that Israel has accepted the ceasefire and that Hamas has rejected it. If they dared to say that, they'd be booed. That happened, by the way, in 2016 and 2020. This is not new. It's getting worse. And if you compare the platform of the Democratic Party now to the platform of 2016, 2020, 2012, it's getting less and less pro-Israel. And just the selection of speakers. I mean, among the speakers were the two most virulently anti-Israel people among the two most seriously anti-Israel people in the Congress. I'm not necessarily talking about the real anti-Semites like Ilhan Omar and some of the others, but AOC, she's called Israel genocidal. That's a blood libel. It's just totally false. Israel has killed fewer people than any army in a relevant, comparable situation. If Israel wanted to commit genocide, there were plenty of opportunities. Genocide against the people of Gaza, their population has tripled since the occupation. That's not genocide. That's self-defense. Killing Hamas is not genocide. And when Hamas uses human shields, killing some human shields is not genocide. But to AOC, it's genocide. And AOC was an invited speaker. Now, she didn't talk much about Israel. She made one, statement that was probably approved by the committee because they didn't want controversy. But by giving her a platform, what they're saying is she's the voice of the Democratic Party. Biden has said the same thing. Listen to that lady. Listen to that lady. She makes a lot of sense. No, she doesn't. She's a bigot, an anti-Semite, a racist, anti-Zionist, and a miserable person, and an ignoramus. And by giving her a central point, they say, listen to her previous speeches, which she called Israel genocidal, apartheid, murderous, and listen to her future speeches, which will even be worse. So giving her a platform, even if she was instructed not to talk about Israel, same thing is true with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, a guy comes from Brooklyn, not far from where I was born, and decides to solve the country's racial problems by moving to Vermont, where there are no people of color to speak of. The guy's a phony and a total hypocrite, and virulently anti-Israel, though Jewish. I mean, that makes you even worse because people say, oh my God, he's Jewish and he's anti-Israel. That he must be right. It's called the argument by ethnic identity. It's as phony as the argument ad hominem. But, those two anti-Israel people were given a platform along with a lot of other speakers, several from the Black Caucus, who refused to even listen to the speech by Benjamin Netanyahu. And then we have the Obamas. The Obamas are responsible for turning the Democratic Party from generally pro-Israel to subtly and then pretty dramatically anti-Israel. Again, they're not talking particularly, nobody's talking about Israel. I don't remember that the word Israel has been mentioned at the convention. Even when President Biden talked about Israel, he didn't mention Israel. He didn't say the word Israel because he was afraid he'd get booed. He just made the outrageous statement that these thugs who were tearing down fences and calling for Hamas to win, they have a good point. They have good points. No, they don't have good points. They have bigoted, racist, anti-American points. Don't listen to them. In fact, I have an op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal in which I skewer President Biden, who I voted for, and he's not nearly as bad as Kamala Harris on this and some of the other Democrats on this. But the idea that he would say that these street thugs who are tearing down fences and calling for victory to Hamas and calling themselves the resistance, which is just another word for Hamas, that you should listen to these people because they have good points? No. You shouldn't be listening to them. You should be giving them the right to make fools of themselves, and then you should be rebutting them. He should have said that what they're asking for is outrageous and wrong. Oh, by the way, when they talk about too many people being killed on both sides, maybe they have a point. That's not what he said. He just said they make good points. No, they don't make good points. That's like saying David Duke makes good points. I don't want to make any comparison, but Mussolini made the trains run on time. He made some good points. Hitler helped the German economy. He made some good points. Castro did away with some of the corrupt leaders. He made some good points. We don't say that about people like that. We don't say that Pol Pot made good points, and we don't say that these street thugs who want to see the end of Israel and the end of America make good points. Shame on you, Joe Biden. What a terrible way to have your final appearance in front of a major audience, saying more about to encourage and to legitimate anti-Semitism than you even claim Trump did. Remember, Biden falsely said he decided to run for president when he heard Donald Trump saying there are good people, there are fine people on both sides of the racist, anti-Semitic group of people who was saying Jews will not replace us. That is a lie. Trump said exactly the opposite. He said these are bad people. What he said is there are fine people on the opposite sides of the dispute about whether or not to take down and destroy the statue of Robert E. Lee. Yeah, there are fine people on both sides. I'm one of them. I'm not in favor of destroying Robert E. Lee's statue. I'm in favor of telling the truth about Robert E. Lee. Put a little plaque underneath the statue and say this was the general of the Confederacy. He was a West Point graduate, great general. Even the North after the war commended him for being a great general. But look, he was on the side of segregation, the side of slavery, and maybe his statue should be put in a museum, but not in a public square. Okay. There are fine people on both sides of that issue. By the way, not only both sides, all sides. There are 4 or 5 different sides to that issue, but don't lie to the public. And it's not only President Biden who has repeatedly, from the day he announced that he was running for president, repeatedly lied about what President Trump had said. And if that's the reason he ran for president, hey, maybe he shouldn't run for president. It's not a particularly good reason based on a falsehood. But what he said, what Biden said, legitimated anti-Semitism much more than anything Trump said. What Biden said is these anti-Semites, these bigots, these anti-American, anti-Israel, many violent people, they have some good points. They're fine people on both sides. How could he have said that after he spent so much time emphasizing the fact that that's the reason he ran for president, because President Trump dared to say there are fine people on both sides. And then he says there are fine people on both. He didn't use the words. It was worse. He didn't say they were fine people. He said they make good points. They don't make good points. Again, if he had said, look, these are miserable people who want to see the end of Israel. They're genocidal. They would like to see nothing more than the Jews taken from the river to the sea and put in the ocean. And don't listen to what they're saying. Now, the fact that there are too many people on both sides dying in Gaza, that's a fair point to be arguing about. But don't say these people making good points without putting it in context of all the bad points they're making. The Democratic Convention is a disaster. It's a disaster for America. It's a disaster for world peace. It's a disaster for Israel. They should have used this convention as an opportunity to put some pressure on Hamas, maybe, to agree to the ceasefire that Israel has already agreed to, the bridging arrangement that the president made. Give Israel credit. They have accepted the American proposal. Hamas has rejected the American proposal. But no, if you ever said that at a Democratic convention, there would be riots. There would be boos to start with, and the boos would be sustained longer than the applause was sustained for any of the speakers. And then there's Obama. Obama is one of the major causes of what's going on in the Middle East. Why? Because he has enriched Iran. He has legitimated Iran. He has pandered to Iran. He has refused to stand up to Iran. And Iran, of course, is responsible for Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and many of the other terrorist organizations that have taken the lives of Americans. 253 Americans were murdered by Hezbollah back in the day. And even more recently, 5 American hostages are still in captivity, being taken by Iran. Yeah, Iran. Yeah. They use Hamas as their surrogate, but it's Iran that is responsible for those hostages. If Iran snapped its fingers and said, return the hostages, they would. If Iran snapped its fingers and said, agree to the ceasefire, they would. Hamas is not an independent operator. Hezbollah is not an independent operator. Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, they all depend for their financing, for their armaments on Iran. And if Iran ever gets a nuclear arsenal, they will be protected by a nuclear umbrella, and their terrorism will only grow worse. Who will be to blame? Barack Obama. Barack Obama, the man who called me into the Oval Office before the 2012 election, sat me down and said, Alan, you've known me for a long time. I don't do anything but tell you the truth. I'm here to tell you I have Israel's back, and Iran will never develop nuclear weapons under my watch. No, I'll just allow them to have all the implements to develop it under the next president's watch, which is probably what he would say. I terminated my relationship with Barack Obama for that reason. For another reason, you probably know the story. For my 75th birthday, I invited him. He was my next door neighbor. He was sharing bushes with us. He and his family were renting the house next door for us for 2 summers. In fact, they put a radio receiver, a telephone receiver in our yard, which we gave them permission to do. They paid us for it. We gave it to charity. He called me to the Oval Office, and he was then supposed to come to my birthday party. The White House said, yes, he's going to come to your 75th birthday party. And then the White House called me and said, is it true that Geraldo Rivera has been invited to your birthday party? I say, yeah, Geraldo's been my friend for many years. Of course, he's invited to my birthday party. He's been to several of my birthday parties. Oh, no, the White House said, unless you disinvite Geraldo Rivera, President Obama will not come to the party. And so I said, well, then the president won't come to the party because I'm not disinviting my friend. I didn't disinvite my friend. So my relationship with President Obama hasn't been particularly good since those episodes. Much less important was the party. Much more important was the fact that he told me he had Israel's back, and I didn't realize he meant to stab and to put a target on, which is exactly what has happened. So what we're seeing is a convention rife with anti-Israel speakers without a single pro-Israel speaker speaking about Israel. Now, there are pro-Israel speakers. Schumer is more or less a pro-Israel speaker. More or less, I say. He calls himself Schumer, Shomer, which in Hebrew means the guardian. Shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel. But he's willing to sell out Israel whenever it's beneficial to his own career. And so he spoke last night. I watched the speech. He talked about anti-Semitism. That's easy. That's easy, talking about anti-Semitism. He wouldn't mention Israel. And Imhoff, same, and many of the others the same. The anti-Israel people also were told not to focus on Israel. Of course, they all say, Sanders said it, OAC said it, AOC said it. We want a ceasefire now. But they didn't follow that by saying, and the way to get it is to pressure Hamas because Israel has already accepted it. Hamas is not. What phonies, what phony arguments. But that's what's happened tragically to the Democratic Party, which is why I no longer consider myself a member of the Democratic Party or a Democrat with a big D. I'm a Democrat with a small d, but the Democrats with a big D aren't Democrats with a small d. They are not on the side of free speech. Many of them, particularly the woke members of the Democratic Party, the so-called progressives are in favor of free speech for me, but not for thee. Generally, freedom for me, but not for thee. And so I'm no longer a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. I vote for candidates without regard to party affiliation. I don't vote to see that there's a Democratic majority in the House or the Senate. That's not my criteria anymore. I vote for the individuals. And if the individuals who comprise the Senate are more Republicans than Democrats, so be it. If the same thing is true in the House, I don't vote based on party considerations anymore. I did for many years, but the Democratic Party has left me the way it left Ronald Reagan and the way it left so many people. Just to talk for a second about Jewish voters used to vote like 80% Democrat. I think in this election, even though Trump is not particularly popular among Jewish voters, I think the vote will be no more than 60-40, maybe 55-45. And if it weren't Trump, if it were a less controversial Republican, I think Jews would begin to vote pretty clearly against the Democrats and in favor of the Republicans. If Mitt Romney were running, or if Nikki Haley were running, and I think Nikki Haley will run, I hope she does, 4 years from now. Because remember, Donald Trump, either way, is not going to be running 4 years from now. I think if Nikki Haley were running, she'd get a majority of the Jewish vote. I'd vote for her. And I'd vote for many other Republicans as well. So we'll wait and see what happens. But I have to tell you, you have to watch this Democratic convention carefully. You're not going to hear it on CNN. Probably won't even hear it on the other channels, because many don't know that the speakers who are speaking, even though they're not talking about Israel, have a long record of anti-Israel votes. Particularly, a number of members of the Black Caucus have been invited to speak in order to, as Schumer inartfully put it, make the Senate look more like America. Let's understand what that means. Make the Senate look more like America. That means that Jews should only have 1 or 2 senators because they're only 1 or 2% of the population. No. That's not the way we vote for people. We don't have quotas in the United States Senate. We vote for people, we should, on the basis of meritocracy. If it were 50% Black based on meritocracy, I'd support it. And if it were, 20% Jewish, I'd support it based on meritocracy. I don't think the Senate should look like the country. It should look like the most meritocratic aspect of the country. I want the 100 best and most qualified people to serve in the Senate. Do you want the pilots who fly your airplanes to look like the country? Do you want your surgeons to look like the country? Do you want only 1 or 2% of the surgeons to be Jewish, or 1 or 2% to be Asian? Or do you want the most qualified people to perform surgery on you and to fly your airplanes? I can tell you what I want, and I can tell you what you want, whether you're willing to admit it or not. We do not want quotas. We want meritocracy. The vast majority of Americans want meritocracy. By the way, you won't hear that word mentioned at the Democratic National Convention because it's not popular. The closest you get to it is an idiotic statement of the kind made by Majority Leader Schumer, saying essentially, we want the Senate to look like America. We want it to be 13% Black, so-and-so percent Asian, so-and-so percent. No, that's not the way we want it. That's the way it was in Tsarist Russia. That's the way it was in Communist Soviet Union. Quotas on everything. Everything has to reflect the ethnicity of the country. During the Tsarist period, every ethnic group was assigned a quota at universities the size of their proportion of the population. And of course, Jews were excluded from the universities. That's why they became violinists. That's why they became computer experts in their own garages. That's why they became great chess players. They excelled at things that you didn't need to fit the quotas. Nobody ever said there was going to be a quota for chess players or for violinists. For years, when you tried out for various symphonies, Boston Symphony, New York Symphony, you tried out behind a screen. So nobody knew whether you were a man or a woman or Black or white or tall or short. They all only knew how you played the violin. That's changing. And I have to tell you, the orchestras are getting less good as a result of it because they're turning down more qualified violinists in favor of having a quota system. Some of the orchestras haven't bought that, and they're better orchestras for it. Again, not so important how good the orchestras were. For me, the test is your pilots and your surgeons. If you want your pilots and your surgeons to be picked based on anything other than meritocracy, raise your hands. The only hands that will go up will be the hands of hypocrites. I love to tell the story that when I needed some particularly delicate medical procedure, I asked around for the most qualified doctor in the entire New York City or Northeast region. I would have gone up to Boston. I wanted the best doctor, and everybody gave me the same name. And I'm not going to mention the name now, but his first name was Carl, and he was a great doctor, and everybody gave the same name. I assumed he was a 6'2" white Anglo-Saxon, white Protestant Brahmin who had, been born in some fancy neighborhood. And Carl walks in, and he's a 5'6" kid from Brooklyn with a thick Brooklyn accent, and he's black. And I was so thrilled to have the best surgeon. And, he performed the procedure wonderfully. And I said, I want him every time. I don't care what his race is or his religion or how tall he is or how charming he is. I mean, I've always said, if I needed a doctor, if I had to be rushed to the emergency room and I woke up and I saw the doctor, what I would like is the ugliest guy, the guy with the worst spoken, because I know he made it on the merits. Nobody's going to pick him because of his charm. The last thing I ever want is a handsome, charming doctor who I worry may have been picked because of his charm and his handsomeness. Meritocracy. That's the secret of American success. And that's the secret of the diminution of universities in America. We will not be a great nation with great universities until we dismantle DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. MIT sent out a notice today saying, as the result of the Supreme Court decision, our first-year class is less diverse. Bullshit. That class, if they followed the Supreme Court decision, is far more diverse. What they mean is it has fewer black people who are wealthy and privileged and successful because they're not being picked on color. They're being picked on accomplishment. So I guarantee you that if they followed the Supreme Court decision, the class at MIT is much more diverse economically, much more diverse philosophically, ideologically, politically, meritocratically, except it may be a little less diverse racially, but only because it doesn't take as many wealthy, privileged people of color who have no basis on meritocracy for coming in. If they're meritocratically admitted, fine, that's great. And they'll be admitted. Nobody's going to discriminate against black people for admission at any university, but they're not going to be given a privileged status in admission just because of their color. That's what the Supreme Court said. And MIT, if you follow those instructions, your class will be more, not less meritocratic. So don't misuse the word diversity. Say what you mean. Under the Supreme Court decision, there are now fewer people of color, fewer African Americans, fewer black people in the class. But we have more poor people. We have more people from the Ozark Mountains. We have more people from the Deep South. We have more people who are against gun control. We have more people who are against choice on abortions. We have more Christians. We have more Orthodox Jews. Yeah, we're much more diverse. But if you look at the class in a photograph, you'll see fewer faces of color. That's not what diversity is about only. Diversity includes, obviously, all factors, including race, but it's not limited to race. So don't lie to us, MIT, and tell us the class is less diverse. Tell us the class is less black, and then tell us about the class, and we'll decide if it's more diverse or not. We'll decide whether you have more conservatives in the class, more people who have different points of view in the class. I guarantee you that if you follow the Supreme Court's decision, you will have greater, not lesser, diversity. And then just going back to the Democratic Convention, again, we're not talking about diversity. There was no diversity of points of view presented at the Democratic Convention. Everybody seemed to be the same. There were more people of color, to be sure, who spoke, and there should be people of every background speaking. But when's the last time an Orthodox Jew spoke at the Democratic Convention? When's the last time a Christian fundamentalist spoke, or an evangelical Christian? Probably the answer is when Jimmy Carter, who was an evangelical Christian but left guy, spoke. But, let's not misuse the terms diversity, and let's understand the Democrats are becoming less diverse, more anti-Israel, more woke, more progressive, and they will have to bear the consequences of that in this and future elections. Okay, so let's look at some letters. Oh, by the way, I got a lot of letters about the book that we talked about yesterday, Solomon Schmidt's book. This marvelous 20-year-old kid who wrote this biography of me, which I've read only about half of it, and I have some criticisms. I wish he hadn't said certain things, or he quoted so many of my enemies so viciously. But you'll enjoy that, whether you like me or not. If you don't like me, you'll enjoy it more. But if you do like me, you'll enjoy it as well. So please get the book, Legal Gladiator. I got a lot of letters saying, the title is good, Legal Gladiator. Gladiators weren't just, they were fighting for their lives. Others have suggested legal warrior, legal, whatever. But in any event, it's a really interesting book and very, very well written. So I commend it to your attention. I hope you will read it. You can get it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Probably not wherever books are sold. A biography of me is not going to be sold in left-wing bookstores. So you probably have to get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the sites that you can have it mailed to you from. Bookstores today. Oh, a bookstore in Brooklyn just banned Zionist speakers, including a progressive Zionist who is anti the current government. They banned them. The owner of the store said, we don't allow Zionists in our store. It's a private store, so can't do anything about it except not shop at that store. So you can look it up online, the name of the store. Professor, I have a lot of respect for you, but stop worrying about the haters. You're right to stand on principle. History will show. I know you're not used to getting invited to all the parties. Who cares if I'm invited? I am so happy not getting invited to some of those parties. My wife loves the fact that we go out more with our family and friends and people who are real friends. The letter says, screw them if they're haters. Well, a lot of the people who hate me because I defended Donald Trump are people who I had to tolerate for years because they were kind of part of our little group. But thank God they're no longer part of any group, and I can tell the truth about them. I remember one guy said to me, I don't want you to be in my society anymore. The guy was the most boring guy I've ever met. I had to tolerate him for years, and he would hang around me trying to get me to recommend cases to him. And then he said, I don't want to be in your society because you defended Trump. Good riddance. I don't even know what it means not to be society, but he understood what it meant. Okay, this is a good one. It's a legitimate question to ask whether Dershow will be paying for and ghostwriting his upcoming biography. First of all, it's not upcoming. It's out. It's there. Second, not only didn't I ghostwrite it, I didn't read it. I started reading it. I'm up to page, I didn't do much since yesterday, 248. After the book was published, I had no import into the book at all. He interviewed me and he quoted some things that I said, and I gave him names of people who liked me and disliked me, but I had no input into the content of the book. So no, of course, I'm not getting paid. And of course, I didn't ghostwrite the book. Unfortunately, the choice between Trump and Harris is a choice between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla and Charybdis are the old Greek areas where if you went near Scylla, you'd hit a rock. If you went to Charybdis, you'd be drowned. So not good choices. I'm not happy with the choices myself, and I know many of you aren't, and many of you are. I don't need to read the book. This is Legal Gladiator. I don't need to read the book. I used to hate you because all I knew was what I heard in the media. Now I know it's the media that is untrustworthy and deserving of hate. That's why I started listening to you. I now have learned that I agree with you most of the time, but not all of the time. You stop learning when you're dead. May we both learn more. I used to love to tell my students that a good class is one where I learn from my students. I'm now teaching a class at the local Chabad on Thursday nights on the book of Genesis, a kind of lawyer's look at the first book in the Bible. And I tell that class, please teach me. And a lot of my students had great insights. And as a result of their insights, I learned. So that's the way I measure a successful class. Um, Dershowitz holds the poisonous view that criticism of Israel equates to anti-Semitism. No, not at all. I'm critical of Israel. You can be critical of Israel. You can be critical of not. You can't do is apply a double standard. You can't say that Israel is more guilty than a country which is far more guilty. You can be critical, but you have to apply a single standard. I apply that to everything. You know that I support the shoe on the other foot test. I support that with regard to Israel as well. If you are equally critical, if you're prepared to talk about the starvation that's going on in the Sudan and the genocide in the Sudan, and then you say, and by the way, what Israel's doing is not quite as bad as that, but you can say that. But you can't ignore Sudan and Darfur and then say that Israel is guilty of things they're not guilty of. So some anti-Israel attitudes are anti-Semitic, some are not. There's no direct equation. So by the time we talk on Monday, the convention will be over. We'll see what happens to the polls after the convention. We'll see whether Iran decides to attack Israel, whether or not Hamas decides to accept the ceasefire. A lot of things will happen over this weekend. So listen to me and watch me starting next Monday. See you then.